Washington: in the best case scenario, if Ramin Haqju and Nima Nia still lived in Iran, they would be married. Just not to each other, to women, probably through arranged marriages. Perhaps they could have found women also attracted to their own gender and looking to hide the fact, like one of Haqju's friends did. In a bleaker scenario, they would be dead or behind bars for the crime of being what they are, gay. Instead, Haqju and Nia ended up in the United States, where they married each other in a joyful ceremony this August. The couple came to the US as refugees several years ago, after fleeing Iran for Turkey. Things are better here in many ways, and they see their story as a hopeful one for other LGBTQ Iranians. They're alive, they're married, and they live openly as gay men. But Haqju and Nia also find themselves in a country where the president tried to ban new refugees and immigrants from Iran and several other Muslim nations, on the argument that such people pose a threat to America's safety. And they worry now about what will happen is already happening to LGBTQ people in a country under Republican rule. They want Iran to change so that people like them can be accepted as gay couples. They want the US to change so they can be accepted as gay refugees from Iran. After so many borders crossed, what will my next country be after tonight? Haqju posted on Instagram the day of the 2016 election. Haqju, 31, grew up in a relatively supportive family in Tehran, but he still struggled. He came out at age 19 to a nurse, who urged him to tell his family. They accepted him, for the most part, other than a brother who used abusive language against him until their mother threatened to take away the brother's inheritance. Haqju was exempted from the military service mandated for all Iranian men because of his sexual orientation, which the Iranian military considers a mental problem. He was terrified to tell the government about his sexuality, as Iran is a dangerous place for LGBTQ people. Homosexuality is against the law, and sex between two men can be punishable by death. Other acts, such as kissing or even just confessing to homosexuality, can lead to punishment. While there are secret networks for LGBTQ people, many of them online, members live under the constant threat of being exposed. But Haqju also wanted to be honest about who he was and to avoid military service, because it can be dangerous even for closeted gay men. He was at risk for other reasons as well. At a June 2009 protest during the Iranian Green Movement, which called for the ouster of then-President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, he yelled out to warn an old woman to be careful because an armed man in a military uniform had his gun aimed at her. The man turned his gun on Haqju instead and shot him. The bullet ripped through the right side of his abdomen. He had surgery to remove nearly a foot of intestines and was in the hospital for almost a week. Haqju spoke about the experience of being shot to a documentary crew and later found out the filmmakers planned to focus on his story. He was afraid of the attention that would draw, so he decided to flee to Turkey. The documentary aired 1 week after he left Iran. Afterward he wanted to return home, but his mother feared it wasn't safe. "Do not come back," she told him. Nia, 29, began receiving text messages from an unknown phone number back in 2006. The first said Happy Valentine's Day, and the number was from Isfahan, Iran, where he was about to move for school. He replied to the texts at first, thinking they were from someone in a LGBTQ chat room, but eventually he stopped. When he arrived in Isfahan, he received another, "Welcome to our city." He didn't reply. Soon came another message threatening to call him on his home number. Then his home phone rang. The man on the other end of the line said that he knew Nia was gay and that nothing bad would happen to him if he cooperated by going to the man's house, and named other gay people. Nia repeatedly declined to confirm that he was gay or to identify anyone else, but the man kept calling. At his college, a security guard told Nia that a man had been there and asked for his schedule. Nia thought he saw someone following him on the street. One day, the man called to say he was near Nia's house. Nia could hear a siren both through the phone and through his door. He was frightened. After months of harassment, Nia met another man who worked as a security guard at a bank and told him what was happening. The security guard contacted the man who had been threatening Nia, and the phone calls finally stopped. But when Nia and the security guard began dating, he faced new problems. The security guard became hostile, threatening both Nia and his parents. Nia escaped that situation when he left for mandatory military service in Abaday, Iran. He chose not to tell authorities about his sexual orientation. When he returned to Myanmar 2 months later, his period of military service was shortened based on his father's past work in a war zone. Nia got a new apartment and a new phone number. He went back to college to study art. But he still didn't feel safe. Every call from a wrong number made him uneasy, and he kept worrying that someone might throw something through his apartment window. Nia finally decided he couldn't stay in Iran, even though he was only a semester away from finishing his degree. He fled to Turkey, leaving his life and art behind. Hokju arrived in Turkey first, in 2010. He and Nia had been friends back in Iran, but they only began dating after Nia left their homeland as well. For 8 months, Hokju waited to find out whether he would be allowed to enter the United States as a refugee based on the persecution he faced for his sexual orientation, political beliefs, and religion. He is a Sufi, and people like him who practice a more mystical brand of Islam have been targeted by the Iranian government. Nia, meanwhile, applied for refugee status in the US based on the persecution he experienced as a gay man. Sometimes others who had fled their homes and were now stuck in Turkey argued that being gay made it easier for Nia and Hokju, that they could move through the refugee process more quickly, while it took longer for political refugees. They didn't understand that being gay in Iran had been a prison, Nia said. Being in Turkey was difficult, too. They had hardly any money and at times went days with no food while waiting for money transfers to come through. Nia was abruptly kicked out of a house he'd rented in the middle of winter because the owner sold it. At least they were together. When Hokju first told Nia he loved him, Nia wasn't ready to say it back. Not until 2011, when Hokju learned his application for refugee status had been accepted and he prepared to leave for the US, did Nia finally say he loved him, too. Another year passed before Nia's refugee admission was approved. He joined his partner in Philadelphia in November 2012. It was hard coming to the United States, even if they believed it was their best option. Their right to be citizens of their native country had been wrenched away from them. They feared that a family member would get sick and die, and they wouldn't be able to go back and say goodbye. I left all of these big and beautiful things for freedom, Nia said. It's not fair. Adjusting to the US wasn't simple. In Philadelphia, Nia worked a few jobs that he hated, including in a Walmart stockroom. He wasn't able to use the skills he learned in art school. He had to take the options available to a newcomer to the US. He began to lose hope in this American life. In 2014, the couple moved to Washington, D.C., to look for full-time work, and Nia finally got to do something creative, designing artwork and producing a podcast for a nonprofit. But he quit that job, he said, because the organization didn't treat him well. Now he's working on a comic book narrated by a cat. Hokju is employed as a human rights researcher at a different nonprofit. The couple has made many friends here. They were featured on the Popular Humans of New York Facebook page in a photo of them standing on a pathway framed with snow and a short caption, "We're gay refugees from Iran." More than 240,000 people liked it. The 2016 election was difficult for them to watch. They both think anti-LGBTQ sentiment has become more explicit under President Donald Trump. The president attempted to bar transgender people from the military, and his Justice Department has said the 1964 Civil Rights Act doesn't prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation. Hokju said he has a very real fear that if he went to a largely pro-Trump part of the country, he would be in danger. He avoids traveling to those places. Trump's efforts to stop Iranians and others from majority Muslim nations from immigrating to the US have hit them hard, too. It doesn't make sense to punish people who don't support their country's government for what that government does, Hokju said. Barring refugees in particular seems cruel to him. Americans should put themselves in refugees' shoes and think about what those individuals have been through, he said. I'm not afraid of Donald Trump, but I'm afraid of the ideology he's representing, Nia said. That ideology is not kind, it's not pro-human rights, it's not pro-diversity. Hokju said he's fed up with fighting for rights, and if it comes to a point in the US when gay people begin to lose their freedom like they did in Iran, he would leave. I'll find somewhere that I'm accepted and I'm free and I'll go there, said Hokju. Which might not be a place on Earth, so we have to fight. Unless we move to another planet, Nia said. But it's not all bad. Last January, Nia proposed to Hokju in Boston. It was a surprise. Hokju thought their friends were gathering from around the country for his birthday. Nia played a video with pictures of the two of them, set to Leonard Cohen's Dance Me to the End of Love. Then, he presented Hokju with a cake decorated with their photo and the words "Marry Me." Everyone cried. They consider themselves opposites in some ways. It would be boring to be with someone just like himself, Nia said. He loves that his husband is kind to everyone and feels responsibility for those around him. I fell in love with all of that, unfortunately, Nia joked. Hokju loves that Nia is honest and dedicated to art and creativity. The two married on August 26 at Mount Airy Mansion in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, a short drive from Washington. The only family member there was one of Nia's sisters, who also lives in the U.S. Most of their relatives don't support the marriage, even though Hokju's family is generally open-minded about his sexuality. But even if those living in Iran had wanted to come to the wedding, it would have been next to impossible to obtain the necessary visas. It would have been hard for them to get U.S. visas even before Trump's executive orders barring entry for Iranians. Both orders have now been blocked in court. But Hokju and Nia still celebrated. Their first dance was to a song with lyrics by Syed Mehdi Mousavi, an Iranian political refugee who now lives in Norway. He wrote it for them specifically. Imagine there is one for you, who wants to leave the crying behind, the lyrics say, as translated from Farsi. He's that person you saw in your dreams, the one who can understand the depth of your pain. The one who is different from the rest of the world, the one who knows life is hard, who has his own troubles, but still, sitting next to you, he is happy. They want to share their story so that other gay people now living in fear around the world know it's possible to find a life out of the closet, although you may have to leave everything you know behind to do it. I left money, I left my car, I left home, I left my friends, said Hokju. We lost many things. Now you want to make a new life, and an amazing one, with your love, he continued. Sometimes I say, Nima, he's my money, he's my parents, he's my brother, he's my old friends and my family. He's my everything. Correction, a previous version of this article misstated the city where Nia attended university. It was Isfahan, not Miami. A Florida dairy farm is under criminal investigation after an undercover video from an animal rights group revealed workers kicking cows in the head and beating them with metal rods. Warning, the following video includes footage that viewers may find disturbing. The video was shot by a member of Animal Recovery Mission who went undercover in August as a farm worker at Larson Dairy in Okeechobee County. The footage shows men brutally abusing cows as the bovines cower and duck their heads. In some cases, the cows are unable to get away because they are confined by bars meant to restrain them for the milking process. Larson Dairy was a supplier of Publix supermarkets, which has announced it suspended deliveries from the farm in the wake of the video, the Associated Press reports. Okeechobee County Sheriff Noel Stephen announced Thursday that he had launched a criminal investigation into the farm. Farm owner Jacob Larson said in a Thursday statement, cited by multiple media outlets, that one employee seen in the video has been fired. We are deeply saddened and appalled by the actions witnessed in this video, which first came to our attention this morning, read the statement. The unusual use of force is simply unacceptable on our dairy or on any other farm. Sheriff Stephen told TC-POM on Friday that 2 other workers, in addition to the man fired, had been placed on suspension. Though Larson's statement asserts the violence seen in the video was an anomaly, Animal Recovery Mission alleges that abuse was rampant at the farm. The group's website states that the cows were regularly beaten over the head and otherwise abused during daily milk collections. Larson has questioned why the undercover worker didn't simply report the abuse as soon as it happened, instead of waiting to release a video and report. "I think they have an agenda," Larson told local news station WPBF. "They want to put farms out of business." Animal Recovery Mission founder Richard Kudo told the Sun Sentinel that his group had no special reason to target Larson Dairy, but wanted to see what was happening in a typical, larger-scale dairy setting in the state of Florida. An Alabama jury has decided that the Army veteran who broke his hip while picking out a watermelon at a Walmart store should receive $7.5 million. Retired Sergeant Henry Walker was 59 in June 2015 when he went shopping at a Walmart in Phoenix City, Alabama, the Ledger-Inquirer reports. As Walker reached for the watermelon, his foot got stuck in the side of a wooden pallet under the display. That led him to fall and shatter his hip, according to court documents described by the Washington Post. Walker's attorney, Sean O'Hara, said the injury permanently changed his client's life. He used to play basketball 3 days a week and now must use a walker to get around. Walker sued Walmart for negligence and wantonness, arguing that the store had not kept its premises reasonably safe. Jurors were shown security footage from the same store that showed several other customers had also caught their feet in the pallet, according to AL.com. This past Wednesday, the jury awarded Walker $2.5 million in compensatory damages and $5 million in punitive damages. Walmart has called those amounts excessive in light of the facts and said it plans to appeal the decision. "Trump is America's wake-up call," I heard a visitor to the United States say the other day. True. Trump's first year has been a wake-up call heard around the world. But are we really waking up? And who is we? And what, if anything, is the new awareness that we are supposed to wake up to? This column inquires into these questions, and announces a major initiative that blends the news and social media power of HuffPost with the online-to-offline movement-building capacities of MITxU.lab. Over the past few months, having attended events and grassroots gatherings in various parts of the world, I'm encouraged that such a waking up and movement-building process is well underway. I've seen firsthand a new landscape of initiatives focused on transforming the foundations of our economies and our social structures that is emerging. At the same time, social media movements such as Me Too have shown how quickly latent and necessary changes can be catalyzed in our current moment. While there is still much more structural and systemic work to be done, it's increasingly clear that as our old economic structures and civilizational forms hit the wall of our planetary limits, a new world is taking shape that focuses on bridging the 3 major divides of our time: the ecological divide, the social-economic divide, and the spiritual divide. This awakening process is not only happening in grassroots movements. It's equally observable among many, particularly younger, leaders working inside our traditional institutions. Everyone knows that we live in a moment of profound disruption. An old order is about to end. And something new is about to be born. Last week, I was running a session at the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. During the discussion, one of the senior management attendees said, "The problem you describe is not totally new. The destructive dynamics of prejudice, ignorance, hate, and fear have been around for a long time." And then he asked, "But why is it so much worse today? What is actually different now?" What a great question. It prompted me to deepen my own sense-making. The 3 responses to disruption. In earlier columns, I have framed the global politics of our present moment in terms of 3 different responses to disruption that are playing out in all sectors and systems. Muddling through, downloading, maintaining the status quo, moving backward, making X great again, moving forward, leaning into the unknown to co sense and co create the future. Response 1, muddling through what the 2017 elections really tell us. The first response just extends the status quo, business as usual. As Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016 and the recent elections across Europe have demonstrated, the mainstream option is increasingly unattractive and unacceptable to the majority of voters. The mainstream parties in the Dutch, French, German, and Austrian elections this year have lost by greater margins than the right-wing parties have gained. In the United States we see this outcome mirrored in the 2016 presidential primaries. The anti-mainstream candidates, Trump and Sanders, gained much more support than the candidates endorsed by the party establishment, Bush and Clinton. The reason Sanders did not make it onto the ticket was because of the manipulative influence of the Clintons and their foundation on the operations of the Democratic National Committee. In other words, the main story of the past year is not just the rise of the far right but the decline of the mainstream status quo parties combined with a failure of the entire political system to generate any viable alternative to the mainstream option other than the outdated ideologies of yesterday, nationalism, or the day before yesterday, white supremacy. Response 2, moving backward. The second response says that the system is broken and that we need to drain the swamp by orienting ourselves backward. This response is much more radical than muddling through. It connects to the felt sense of frustration. But it operates on the closing of the mind, heart, and will, i.e., the amplification of prejudice, ignorance, hate, and fear. As filmmaker Michael Moore put it so succinctly, ignorance creates fear, fear creates hate. The 5 main behaviors of this cycle include denial, not seeing what is going on. Example, this year, the United States has been hit by one worst ever hurricane after another. What conversation are we not having? The conversation about climate change. There is more than one mass shooting every day, on average, but what conversation are we not having? The conversation about gun laws. That's what denial looks like on a societal level. Denial is reinforced through the politics of lying. Since Donald Trump took office, he's made at least 1,318 false or misleading statements, but by the time you read this the actual number will be higher. Dissensing, being unable to empathize with others. Donald Trump is the living embodiment of that condition. But Trump is only the symptom. The deeper problem includes a broader loss of empathy in society. The amplification mechanisms here include digital echo chambers within social media and the use of micro-targeting and dark posts, designed to stir up hate and fear across racial and other divides, funded by the Russian government and by US billionaires like Robert Mercer. Absencing, losing the connection to one's emerging future self, that is, getting stuck in the rigid identities of the past, getting stuck inside one's ego boundaries, me first, blaming others, the inability to reflect on one's own role. Blaming others deepens and hardens the dynamics of us versus them and results in delusional fantasies about building walls against outsiders that keep us trapped into an architecture of separation. Destruction, the outcomes of this cycle result in the destruction of nature, pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, disabling the Environmental Protection Agency, the destruction of trust and the undermining of international institutions, UN, NATO, the Iran nuclear deal, and the destruction of institutions like healthcare that keep our societies together. The United States isn't the only country dealing with these things. There is a cycle of destruction and self-destruction observable in many systems and sectors of our civilization today. In most global systems today we collectively create results that, almost, nobody wants. Response 3, moving forward. The third response is perhaps the most important and least familiar. This response attends to disruption by leaning forward into the unknown, by sensing and actualizing the future that wants to emerge. To do that you need 3 critical capacities: listening and curiosity, an open mind, empathy and compassion, an open heart, as well as confidence and courage, an open will. If you face a moment of disruption and you lack these critical capacities, You are easily thrown into the space of absencing, that is, into a self-reinforcing dynamic of separation and destruction. Seen from this angle, we can see the rise of Trumpism and fundamentalism not only as the result of economic and political failures, but first and foremost as a massive educational failure. 5 forces that amplify the cycle of destruction. Figure 1 summarizes how our responses to disruption give rise to both of these cycles, the cycle of absencing and destruction, and the cycle of presencing and co-creation. Both cycles coexist in society today. We know both of them well from our own behavior. They are separated only by the degree of openness in our minds, hearts, and wills as we respond to disruption. If we look across systems today, we see a lot of evidence that both these cycles exist and that both have a lot of evidence and momentum. But why does the public conversation and public consciousness focus almost exclusively on the cycle of absencing and self-destruction? Why does the cycle of absencing and destruction dominate the public conversation while the cycle of creation remains largely invisible and unattended to? I see 5 structural forces that make what's happening today different. Let me quickly describe them and then conclude how the destructive direction of these forces can be turned around to functioning as forces for co-creation. 1. The news and social media as a noise amplification machine. Media and social media keep amplifying the noise and creating distractions that penetrate every corner of our private and professional lives. One of the drivers is that negative news often sells better than positive news. It's better business for the platform. For example, it was widely reported by BuzzFeed that at the height of the 2016 US election, people shared more fake news stories on Facebook than they shared stories from real news sites. Much of what the news and social media do amounts to amplifying the noise machine and magnifying society's condition of collective ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that is, jumping from one crisis flashpoint to another, without ever addressing any of the deeper issues involved. Instead, we need to deepen our collective focus on the systemic root issues that underlie the symptoms. We need to close the feedback loop of collective awareness and action, that is, we need to become aware that in this age of reflexive modernity our own actions can backfire and crumble the foundations of our own system. See Figure 2. 2. Technology, dark posts, micro-targeting, and echo chambers. The second structural force is technology as it currently shows up through tech giants like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple. Technology was first seen as force for good. But as companies like Facebook and Google grew, they started to put their profitability and ambition for global empire building above their commitment to be a force for good. That choice has turned us, the users, from being customers to being the product that is sold to whoever pays most, i.e., right-wing billionaires or the Russian government. The result is that these companies have become a force for undermining our democracy, as last week's congressional testimony by tech executives made shockingly clear. The use of dark posts, micro-targeting, and algorithm-based social echo chambers are examples of how technology is now a sophisticated mechanism to manipulate voters in ways that increasingly rip our communities apart. The heightened incidence of aggression and violence within the United States is just one example. As these giant monopolistic forces increasingly dominate our lives and refuse to behave responsibly, we have to ask ourselves what future we want for our societies. A future in which human behavior is just an extension of machine-made algorithms, or a future in which these monopolies are broken up unless they voluntarily refocus their purpose from global empire building to serving the well-being of all. If aiming for the latter, it would require the leaders of these organizations to shift their mindset from ego to ecosystem awareness, from empire building to serving a larger ecosystem of societal innovation and renewal. The final 3 structural forces relate to the missing update of the operating system that we use to run our economies, democracies, and educational systems. 3. Massive economic failure. The ever-increasing levels of inequity represent the third structural factor in our current moment of disruption. 2 quick facts to illustrate this point. 1. In the United States, the life expectancy of the country as a whole is becoming shorter, which is extremely unusual and alarming for a highly developed country. The decline is particularly pronounced for white males with low levels of education and income, i.e., the forgotten people that Trump has given voice to. 2. 8 rich people in the world own as much as half of mankind combined. At the root of this massive economic failure, the 4-decade-long decline of the middle class, is the neoliberal economic paradigm that promised a rising tide of wealth would lift all boats, but never delivered on that promise. Instead, the biggest of these boats just got bigger and bigger. One of the main amplification mechanisms here, as we also learned this week through the Paradise Papers, is the tax system that allows the 0.01%, the superrich individuals and institutions, like Apple, to engage in legal tax avoidance and reusing the same money to further, legally, bribe the political class in DC to even increase these same tax loopholes in the system. Which brings us to the fourth factor. 4. Dark money and the slow death of democracy. The fourth structural force concerns the creeping death of democracy that is nowhere more visible than in Washington, D.C. If you are a lawmaker, you spend roughly 50% of your time raising money for your next election campaign. How do you do that? You go where the money is. That means you spend your time listening to the 0.01% and their armies of lobbyists. 5 major industries control the lion's share of all lobbying power in Washington: Wall Street, Big Pharma, Big Energy, the military-industrial complex, and the Silicon Valley big data empires. The lobbying power of these industries makes sure that all major policies reflect their interests and preferences, while the will of the majority of voters is routinely ignored. Examples: Wall Street banks roll back financial regulation and consumer protection, healthcare costs, already the highest in the world, keep soaring, environmental protection is being dismantled, climate change ignored, weapons are sold into crisis regions, and the right of citizens to control their own private information is almost completely ignored. In her book Dark Money, Jane Mayer describes how the rise of Trump and the far right is the result of a long-term multi-billion-dollar investment by a small group of billionaires that included to change the public perception of climate change and the creation of a movement that put the Trump administration into office to execute the 5-point special interest group agenda mentioned above. Some of them have been long-term investors and funders, like the Koch brothers. Others, like Robert Mercer, only recently joined that field, by making the Breitbart media platform work for Trump messaging. The Koch brothers and friends intentionally created a climate denial industry. Over the course of just 7 years, from 2003 to 2010, they invested no less than $500 million in this venture. The campaign was funded by 140 conservative foundations that pooled their money and distributed $558 million in the form of 5,299 grants to 91 different nonprofit organizations. Dark Money, p. 251. While it is not new that plutocrats in the United States, and elsewhere, buy political influence or entire elections, what is new is the level of professionalism in the strategic funding effort, including the pooling of resources and strategic long-term investing in high-impact individuals with influential ideas, well-known think tanks, and university programs and media infrastructures, as well as in on-the-ground movement building. 5. Massive educational failure. So we have some media-related issues. We have economic and political issues that relate to the lack of further evolving our economic and democratic operating systems. But what is at the even deeper source level at issue here? Education and learning. The fifth force concerns a massive failure of our educational systems. In most educational systems we have moved from an input orientation, 1.0, to an output orientation, 2.0, as outlined in Figure 3. Education 2.0 can also be described as bulimia learning, fast in, fast out. Information is ingested and regurgitated in standardized tests, but never has a chance to become real knowledge. While the mainstream schools have moved into 2.0 and the better schools today are moving from 2.0 to 3.0, that is, to a more student-centric architecture, only the most innovative are beginning to move into Education 4.0, which focuses on activating the deeper sources of creative, professional and human development. Thus, the primary challenge for our educational systems is to move beyond education from 2.0 towards 3.0 and 4.0, i.e., student-centric forms of learning that activate the deeper sources of creativity and knowing. 5 forces for remaking our world from within. What does it take to turn the tide of these 5 forces from destruction to co-creation? If we attend to it, we can see many inspiring initiatives on local, city, and sometimes state or country levels that are modeling ways of bridging the ecological, social, and spiritual divides. But only a few of them are doing so on a larger level of scale that is called for today. What does it take to turn these manifold grassroots seeds into a vibrant ecosystem that transforms capitalism towards social and environmental justice, towards well-being for all? A new initiative for making our movement see itself. One part of what it takes are new coalitions, new cross-sectional partnerships that pool our resources, networks, and capacities to serve this larger purpose. To prototype such collaborations, HuffPost is teaming up with the Presencing Institute, PI, in a joint initiative that blends the online news media reach of HuffPost with the global capacity and movement building infrastructures of PI and MITxU.Lab in order to launch a joint initiative that will create an interactive multimedia hub to move the new economic narrative from marginal to mainstream. Shine a spotlight on pioneers and inspiring living examples of the new economy and the principles that guide them. Connect aspiring change makers with the pioneers that already created inspiring living examples around the various key acupuncture point areas of transforming capitalism. Share key frameworks that link the transformation of capitalism and the upgrading our democratic and educational systems with the UN framework of the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, provide methods, tools, and movement-building capacities that help change makes to move from idea to action. HuffPost has already launched a Facebook page and started reporting on new economy topics. The main interactive multimedia learning hub is being developed now and will be launched in March 2018 on the PI website. It will include monthly, online live broadcasts on key areas of transforming capitalism, regular digital community cafes in which change makers and movement builders connect with each other in order to form place-based hubs for change, and many other features that will help change makers to move their initiative from intention to impact. So, to return to the question of the ECB manager, why seem the forces of destruction so much more powerful than the forces of co-creation? Because the latter ones do not have any real amplification mechanism. And that's exactly what we are trying to build and prototype over the next few months. The main purpose of the interactive media hub and platform is to help the emerging global movement sense and see itself across sectors, systems, and cultures. To the degree that this happens, we will see the dynamics shift from destruction to creation, from absencing to presencing. If you want to join this local to global movement building for awareness-based systems change, please sign up for the PI mailing list so we can keep you informed when the enabling infrastructures are ready for launch. Thanks to Adam Michelson and Laura Pattison for their input on this column.